Did you guys see that? Did you guys see that? Buying a house in Staten Island. Should I be worried about it being haunted?
Depends on how scared you are, right? If Washington Irving had pitched his tent on Staten Island, he would have found many legends that could have inspired an interesting story.
What's going on, everyone? We're not really sure when you're viewing this, so good morning, good afternoon, and if you're ready to shut off the video, then good riddance. We didn't want you here anyway. I'm Alec Willis, and alongside me is my co-host and the only licensed real estate professional on this show, Vincent Brown, and this is the Tom Crimmins Realty Real Talk, where we have real, genuine conversations with real, genuine people like the man you see beside me. So today, as you can see, we're in the Hillside Cemetery, and we're joined by a very spooky guest, special guest, I should say. My good friend, Michael Pelczar, who is the founder and creator of Spooky Staten Island, which is a group, if you haven't heard of, dedicated to preserving the rich and haunted heritage of Staten Island. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Vin. Vin, you'll take it from here.
How's it going today, Mike?
Good, thank you guys for having me.
Brought us into certainly an environment I'm not usually in unless for the obvious reasons. Why am I here, Mike? Why is Alec here? Why are we sitting in the middle of a cemetery amongst people from a couple hundred years ago?
So that's a loaded question, and I think that everybody should spend more time in cemeteries because pretty much all of us are going to end up in one eventually, so you might as well get used to being home now. Good real estate is hard to find, and that's definitely true for cemeteries too. But I decided to do our interview today in a cemetery because it's so central to what we do at Spooky Staten Island. And Spooky Staten Island is a group that I started kind of accidentally out of interest in the borough's folklore and history and all of the unique stories that Staten Island has. And of course, cemeteries are the perfect place to learn about those stories. The stones are permanently engraved with people's names, they have dates, some of them have detailed inscriptions, and by exploring cemeteries, you really get a feel for what Staten Island used to be like and some of the people, or, you know, as you can call them, characters, yes, from our very colorful history.
Oh, I for one, am a huge fan. I know our boss, Tom Crimmins, is a huge fan. That's why he was so passionate about us having this. This is our first episode, so thank you for being here.
No, you're making me blush.
Where, and I'll start this because we'll take it from the beginning, where did this kind of interest in the spooky nature of Staten Island kind of come from for you? Like, what age, around, where did it?
Well, I've always been interested in ghost stories and things that go bump in the night. My parents and grandparents could tell you so many stories about when I was, a toddler, decorating with Halloween decorations and, wanting to go to spooky places like Salem and things like that.
So you were for it?
I don't know what happened as a child or in the womb or whatever, but I've always been really interested in that sort of thing, but I never made the connection to Staten Island until later in life.
Okay.
And that happened when I was maybe in high school, and I started really listening to the things that people were saying. And what really stood out in my mind is that things that seemed so common and so ordinary to people who lived here were actually very strange. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
The fact that we have the ruins of Seaview Hospital here on Staten Island, and people would just casually bring up to me that, oh yeah, we were exploring at Seaview, and we did a seance at Seaview, and people would bring up the ship graveyard in Rossville. They would go, oh, have you ever been to the boat graveyard? And all these things, and Vanderbilt's tomb, of course, which has a legacy all of its own, and all of these things kind of bounced around in my head, and I thought, hey, these are all on Staten Island. That's kind of weird. And so I already then was kind of thinking of Staten Island differently, and I decided to take it another step and kind of look into, well, what is here on Staten Island? And I actually found a Facebook post of mine from like 2016.
Okay.
So I was still in high school, and I had written about some of the things on Staten Island. I was like, oh, did you know that the Vanderbilt tomb is here? Did you know that we have X amount of cemeteries on Staten Island? Just like, fun facts about the spooky history of Staten Island. And that was really like the genesis of this whole project.
Yeah.
So I started doing newspaper research. I started going to the Staten Island Museum. I started asking people, you know, hey, like, what's up? Like, what are some Staten Island stories? I started meeting people who had been on Staten Island for many generations. I started meeting people who were local historians, and it kind of just all snowballed. And, you know, the more I found out, the more interested I became. So it's, you know, it's been a interesting little journey.
It's been a run. I
Yeah.
mean, I think we can consider you pretty much one of those local historians now when it comes to things of the spooky nature of Staten Island. So I would give yourself credit with that. But
Listen, I've definitely been around the block a couple of times, but there are people who've like spent so much of their lives
Yeah.
doing this, and you know, it's really great to talk to people who have that kind of experience. Because, you know, what I lack in experience, I make up for in enthusiasm.
Yes, yes.
But there's nothing that beats the knowledge of someone who really has spent their whole life accumulating those kind of stories.
No, that's awesome. And I mean, before I pass over Vin for his question, I'm just gonna, like, what it sounds like to me with Staten Island and a lot of these places is, for me, it's like, how could I say this? It's like the Statue of Liberty for me, where I know where it is, I've heard about it, but personally, and I might get some slack for being a New Yorker, I've never been there. And I know a lot of people native to Staten Island have places here that we've all heard of, but haven't really been to. And maybe for one reason or another, maybe it's the spooky side of it that is scaring you a little bit or turning you off to it. Just fell off my chair. It's a little hilly over here.
That's why they call it hillside.
But part of that could be not really scared, but just not understanding it enough. And that's why Mike's here. Maybe he can provide some clarity. But Vin, you got anything you want to?
Certainly. Mike, where do you find the bulk of your data that you gather and the information you find? Because obviously the internet is such a plentiful source, but when you go on a national database, it doesn't necessarily find the local stories.
Yeah.
So where's your
That's
where's
a great
your source?
question. So I think data collection is the most important and simultaneously most difficult thing about this.
Yes.
Because really every headstone in this cemetery has a story attached to it. And if someone lived 50 years, 60 years, that's an awful lot of stories attached to their life. Now, how many of those stories are written down anywhere, whether they're in newspapers or journals or things like that? Probably very few. So the challenge becomes collecting small bits of information from all different sources and then trying to weave together some sort of narrative to either explain something about how Staten Island was, something about how the country was, something about how the world was at that time, to make it make sense for people. So I think, you know, I'm very much a technology person. I'm very much like an internet person. And so that's where I start with all my research. And I use resources like Ancestry.com and newspaper archives. The New York State Historic Newspaper Archive actually has a great digital selection of Staten Island newspapers. So I try to search names, dates, keywords. Sometimes I'll search something like ghost Staten Island or haunted Staten Island. And it'll take hours. I'll really have to sift through the results to see what's actually on Staten Island. You know, what is a good ghost story that's, you know, something that really hasn't been talked about before. Because I think we have a bunch of local legends that are kind of known by people. People don't really know the details, but, you know, it's like things that get tossed around in conversation. Like the Conference House, everybody knows that the Conference House has a ghost story. But the real interesting part is finding like the detailed stuff and finding like period newspapers that describe, you know, exactly why the ghost story got started, what was the ghost story, what did people claim to have seen at the time. There's actually a song about the Conference House that I found in my research.
Really?
Yeah, it was like a tavern song, like from the 19th century. And it was like, you know, about the ghost legend of the Conference House.
Wow.
So I thought that was a great find. And things like that are really what keep me so addicted to more research.
To hunting more of the haunted, I guess you could say.
Absolutely.
It's, and sorry, Vin, you can add to that, but when you said that, it's almost like, because we all went through the Staten Island school system and stuff like that, and we've learned history on a broad level, but we don't really get spoken to about the local level. And to me, I always wanted to learn about that.
Absolutely.
Like, a teacher will mention the Conference House, that's all they'll do, they'll mention it. And I always knew, like, as a kid, like, I want to know about where I'm from. And I'm sure you both feel the same way. And
of course.
maybe that's something that we could do a better job of. And having Mike here and with the Spooky Staten Island page he created, will kind of give people an avenue to find out about that knowledge on their own, but then kind of it flurries into the classroom where it becomes conversation now, and it becomes really interesting. So Vin, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to what you asked.
I'm just so fascinated by Mike and what Mike does. This isn't necessarily my forte. I'm more of a numbers guy in
you guys
finance.
are flattering me too much. Stop it, seriously.
All right.
You know, it's
I got a question, and it's a little on the lighter side.
Yeah.
Aren't you worried about coming across something that, because I know that worries people.
No.
I know it. No.
No, not at all.
Okay.
But why?
I'm a little bit of an agnostic with the whole supernatural thing, which I know
Okay.
people are like, like, out of all people.
Yeah.
But truthfully, what interests me the most is the human element of all of it. Why we tell ghost stories, what do ghost stories say about the places that they're told in, what do they say about the people that tell them, and the culture that they exist in. So that's really what interests me about it. And of course, as a photographer and as someone who appreciates visual things, the aesthetic of these places, the architecture and the symbolism and things like that, that is of interest to me. I'm not super scared of the paranormal side of things. I've never really had a ghost experience that I could say, like, definitely that was supernatural. So I've never had that happen to me. So that's not something that I'm, that I think about often.
I got you.
If it happens, I'd definitely be scared, though.
I think
no
we all would.
question,
I think we
right?
all would.
Like, I'm not saying, I'm not afraid, like, if something were to happen, but I just, it's not really something that I think about. And
I got you.
honestly, I think the ghost would be cool with it.
Well, that's what I was gonna say. I think you do a great job of. It's more of a preservation and a respect
I
to
hope
where
so.
you are, and being in Hillside Cemetery, which is a pretty old cemetery. These grounds are historic. These grounds are old and they are fragile, and Mike handles them with all the respect in the world. So I don't think, even if there is some paranormal, supernatural thing being there, it's not coming after Mike.
So let me tell you a story about kind of like this. So Hillside is a cemetery that's maintained by a local nonprofit called Friends of Abandoned Cemeteries.
Okay.
And we partnered with them for a tour last year of a different property, the Richmond Terrace cemeteries. So it's 3 cemeteries that are incorporated together. There's no like physical boundaries between them. They're just like on a plot of like land together.
We're getting some helicopter
I see
overhead.
I think they found
I'm
us,
gonna
guys.
repeat that line.
Yeah.
I'm gonna repeat that line.
I think we lost you at Richmond Terrace.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll back up to that point. So I'll tell you a story about that one. This cemetery, Hillside, is maintained by a group called Friends of Abandoned Cemeteries. It's a local nonprofit that cares for multiple different cemeteries across the borough that have no one else to care for them. And last year we partnered with Friends of Abandoned Cemeteries for a tour of the Richmond Terrace cemeteries. So it's 3 burial grounds that are contiguous. They're all on one plot of land together. And the cemetery is rarely open to the public. So we got, they gave us special permission. We did a tour together. It was the only time, I think that year, that it had been open, or maybe the second time we did a cleanup as well there.
Okay.
So on our tour, there is a legend of a ghost at Richmond Terrace Cemetery, one of several. And the ghost story is that of John Barker. And his
Barker,
grave,
you said?
Barker.
Okay.
And his grave is like an obelisk. It's a tall obelisk. And the story goes that he was a wealthy, I think he was involved in shipping, a captain or something like that. And he was buried in the cemetery, but his ghost persisted. And his ghost persisted in his home, which was not far away, maybe like a block away. And the person who was restoring his home, all of a sudden had supernatural things happen to them. And, like they saw his ghost in their house, and they heard noises, the usual haunted house stuff.
Yeah.
And, but the guy like actually decided to do something about it. So apparently he had this little ceremony. He basically brought plants to the cemetery. They did like a procession. There was, I think, a priest and maybe some other kind of religious leader. And like they did like this procession to the cemetery. They buried these plants at his grave. And supposedly after that, the ghost activity stopped at his home, but started in the cemetery.
Okay.
So fast forward, John Barker apparently has a thing for young ladies, women in like their 30s. And those are the people who report to see him or experience his presence. He's a mischievous ghost. People feel hands on them, people feel a chill up their spine, things like that.
Yeah.
So our tour group was going through the cemetery, and this was before the tour actually started, but I only found out about it during the middle of the tour. So during the tour, Lynn Rogers, the executive director of Friends of Abandoned Cemeteries, is telling people about the ghost story. And I'm watching the people on our tour, and there's this one woman who's maybe like in her 30s, attractive young woman. Her face drops. She's like, and then she starts like whispering to the person next to her on the tour. So I just had a feeling that would be interesting. So I was like, I called her out. I was like, oh, like, what's going on? Like, do you have something like to add? And she said that she had no idea about any of the history of the cemetery, which you wouldn't. It's barely online. I think there's like one Facebook post about this ghost story. So it's not like this is public knowledge really. But she said that she was taking pictures before the tour. She was at this area. She didn't know anything about any of the stories or any of the people. And she felt a chill. She felt hands on her. And she literally felt terrified at that moment.
Wow.
And she didn't know what it was. She couldn't explain it. She didn't really think anything of it after, she got on the tour and happened. She kind of like brushed it away. But when we told her the story of John Barker, I could see that her face, really reacted. And I could tell that she had an experience like that. So I always like to say that we technically have had a ghost experience at one of our events before.
That's interesting. I guess waivers aren't a thing, just in case.
Yeah. Well, the living can sign all the waivers they want.
Yeah, still I can help them. I got you. That's interesting.
That's certainly.
I mean,
no words. No words.
I mean, it's chilling a little bit to talk about it, but it's something that, like I said, I think people's timidity to it comes from not knowing a lot about it. And the more knowledge you gain and the more knowledge that I think you obtain, then the more comfortable you'll be around sitting in a place like we're sitting, because it's a beautiful place, the Hillside Cemetery. It really is. So, Mike, I know you run a group at Spooky Staten Island. We've said that. You mentioned that you were doing a tour.
Yes.
So talk more about your tours. You got something coming up. I know it's Halloween season.
So we're doing a tour of a cemetery on Staten Island that has never before been toured.
Interesting.
It's Woodland Cemetery on Victory Boulevard. And the cemetery historically has suffered a lot of neglect. And so the cemetery board currently is trying their best to rectify that situation. So this tour that we're going to be doing is partly a fundraiser to help them raise some money to, remove trees and debris and, get the place looking more presentable. But this is the first time that they've ever done, a guided tour. So the stories that we'll be telling, a lot of them I found in my research firsthand. It's, as new as it can be. It's material that very few people have heard, have seen. It's new stuff and it's interesting stuff. Very interesting things. And that's going to be in October.
Okay.
I will post the exact date on my Spooky Staten Island Facebook group.
Awesome.
So if you want updates about that, check us out there.
Yep.
And I'll put a link to tickets as well as soon as they're available.
No, that's awesome. With these tours that you're doing, are you the one walking them through, or it's people?
It depends, but yes, a lot of the time it's me.
So it's you projecting everything you know.
A lot of the time it's me. I like to dress in costume to,
That's awesome.
really
That's
get
awesome.
the get the
I
vibe going.
I love that.
So I go ham on the character with that stuff.
What do you dress up as?
Like a Victorian black cloak with a top hat. That's usually my
Okay. That's
Alrighty
the go-to.
then.
That's usually my go-to.
Is it only in the tours, or do you wear that out sometimes?
I definitely wear the trench coat out, but not the top hat.
I got you. Oh God, no, I like that.
No, I don't really have enough top hat occasions in my life to wear that out.
Most of us don't. Most of us don't, I would think. Vin, you gotta add anything? 'Cause
Just something else. If you were to purchase a home, I know you said you've never had your own supernatural activity experiences, X, Y, and Z. Would you have any apprehensions regarding the supernatural buying a home?
No, because I think it would be a great story no matter what.
I like that.
So I kind of want to experience whatever is coming my way.
And I mean, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to tell a story, obviously, about Mike and Spooky Staten Island, but really encompassing the history of it. And because it's a place we're proud to live on, it's a place we want people to know more about. And it's not talked about enough, or it's not talked about in a positive light enough. And we're doing this interview. Halloween's a few weeks away. I mean, Salem gets mentioned a lot with Halloween. I don't know if you want to mention anything with Salem. I don't know, because I know you said they do a great job
They do.
out there, but
They
I
definitely
know
do.
you also hope that Staten Island can somewhat
Have
try
a piece of that.
What's the competition, Mike? What's in our arsenal? Come on, give us something to look forward to.
You know, and I truly don't think of it as a competition. I'm just, it really makes me happy that Salem is able to teach people its history in such an entertaining way that, they get the crowds of tourists that they do every single year. Because there are many beautiful, quaint towns in New England that have interesting histories, but Salem is the go-to, and I think, I don't know if we could be Salem exactly, but I think we could certainly have a piece of that mystique, and I think that Staten Island certainly has the stories to back that up. One of our local historians, William T. Davis, his name is the William T. Davis Wildlife Reserve. So if you look around, you will see his name in places.
Okay.
He was one of the co-founders of the Staten Island Museum. He actually wrote in his journal, he was like, if Washington Irving, who is the man who wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, if Washington Irving had pitched his tent on Staten Island, he would have found many legends that could have inspired an interesting story. So, our history is long. It goes back that far. We have witches, we have folklore about witches. We have a woman who really was accused of witchcraft and put on trial, who lived in Connecticut. And after her trial, she fled to Staten Island. And that's documented. This is a real person who really lived. We have more ghost stories than I could count. I mean, between the Kreischer Mansion and Snug Harbor and Richmond Town, we have no shortage of ghost stories on Staten Island. So I think that the legends are here and the folklore is here. It's just that not enough people know about it, and I would like to change that. I would like to really get people excited about the things that have made me so excited to discover them.
Yeah, and look, I'm personally booked a trip to Salem this year, so I'm excited about that. But how great would it be if we have some of that here?
Bring Mike.
Yeah, I'll bring Mike to be the tour guide. I don't gotta worry about it. I'll get my personal tours.
Now I gotta do my Salem research.
Yeah, exactly. But it's rich history. It's history that we hear about as a whisper. We don't.
I think we take it for granted a lot of times.
But we also don't. Well, you're at the forefront of it. We don't have that central hub that says, or that initiative that's saying, we're gonna be the spearhead for this, and you're starting it. You're doing tours, and I appreciate it. I know Vin appreciates it.
Certainly.
And I love to see where it goes. Is the end game Salem? Or is it more...
The end game is to make Staten Island the best version of itself that it can be,
Okay,
I think.
I like that.
And, I don't know how big of a role this could have in that process, but I've had, the privilege of knowing a lot of people who have done a lot of good for the Staten Island community. My employers, the Nicotras, are local philanthropists. I've had the pleasure of working with the team at Richmond Town, the team at Snug Harbor. I have been really lucky to have so many good people on my side. So, I just want to do my part in that process. And I think that process has already been started. I think that process has been going for a while now, that our local cultural organizations are really stepping things up. I just want to do my share because I really do feel an obligation. And, as I discover these stories and as I visit these places, I do feel a sense of personal responsibility, which is kind of weird, I think, but I do. And I feel like, when you learn the details and the stories and the history and you really understand why these places are important, you can't help but be fascinated by them and you can't help but want to preserve them. But you have to learn those stories first. And that's really where I think I could help out.
Yeah. No, and like Vince, that's well said.
Yeah, it really is.
Everyone,
Thank you.
I think everyone has a story to tell. And I think the beauty of what you're doing, this is a story I think people are going to want to listen to. It's just, we're getting it out there. And people are going to hear it. I think people are going to love it. That's why we're doing this. But I would be remiss to not bring up the real estate aspect of it because we are Tom Crimmins Realty, Real Talk. So let's just have it. Buying a house in Staten Island, should I be worried about it being haunted?
Depends on how scared you are, right?
Okay.
No,
Okay.
I don't think that I would be worried. I think that there are things that people, do to mediate their risk of getting haunted. If that's a concern for you, priests do certain blessings on houses. I think rabbis do similar. blessings
Yeah.
like that. There are people who are, psychics or sensitives that also, are able to cleanse homes and things like that. So I think, if that's really a concern of yours, there are definitely options for it. Some of us want a haunted house, though, so
I was just
Yeah,
kidding. You
like
might
the example.
enjoy it.
I
I mean,
would kind of like that. So
that might be where the next interview is.
at my
in a haunted house.
from your lips to God's
Yeah.
ears, right?
Vin
I'll
may
stand
not be
outside.
there. Vin may
y'all
not be
could
there.
do that. We'll Skype in or something like that. We'll be
He's gonna
okay.
he's gonna Zoom call in.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
But that would be cool.
That would
That
be
would be
really cool.
definitely interesting. I could definitely see us doing that,
Yes,
especially.
for sure.
Vin, you want anything to add?
You know what, Mike? I just want to tell you how much we appreciate your time here, because the amount of information that you bring to light, coming from a local Staten Islander and a native for multiple generations now, I have been told many things about this island that so many people wouldn't know about. And even those that live here for the multiple generations don't know about either. And what you do is truly something in a world where we get confused as to what could be true and what's not. And you're bringing the truth to light, whether that be, as you mentioned, how you find your data or other things that you just present to us. And I want to thank you on behalf of myself, Alec, Tom Crimmins Realty, and Staten Island for what you do, because you put in the work, you put in the effort, and it bears fruit. And so I thank you for that.
That is a very, very kind and flattering, and I think too flattering compliment, but I appreciate it very much.
No.
And I really enjoyed being on with you guys.
I thought it was great, Mike. You're too humble, I think.
I
think
agree.
You
This
deserve
is
some
a
credit for what
kind
you're
man.
doing, because you're doing it, like I said, from a good place, from a preservation, from out of respect to where you're from, and
Certainly.
what's in the place you're from. And
It's our community.
Yes.
It's our community, and I think we all have a responsibility
Yep.
towards it.
And that's why we're doing this. We're reaching out to people who have an impact on Staten Island, and we want to sit down and have a conversation with them. Mike, he's as hard as a worker as I know, especially with this. He probably knows more answers, more research, more stories about your family because of his archived work at Ancestry.com and stuff like that. So I'm afraid to ask him what he knows about mine. But it doesn't go unnoticed. And like we've mentioned, Mike is from Spooky Staten Island. Well, he started Spooky Staten Island, the Facebook group. Like them, follow them, Instagram, wherever you can really find them. It's Michael Pelczar if you want to follow his personal accounts.
Yep.
I'm sure you'll see a link or a tag or something from that to the Spooky Staten Island pages. And just again, Mike, we appreciate your time.
No, thank
Me
you
and
guys.
Vin and Tom Crimmins Realty, we couldn't be more thankful for what you're doing for the community. And like I said, my name's Alec Willis. This is Michael Pelczar and my co-host Vincent Brown, and this is the Tom Crimmins Realty Real Talk.